Today we're kicking off day 3 of the Global Research Forum 2021, the fruition and challenges of computational social science. And we will have our 5th keynote speech today with Professor Anindya Ghose. And I'm very happy to introduce my good friend and esteemed colleague, Anindya Ghose, who's Professor Anindya Ghose. He's the Heinz Real Chair, Professor of Technology and Marketing at New York University's Stern School of Business, where he holds joint appointments in both Technology Operations and Statistics Department and the Marketing Department. He received his PhD from Carnegie Mellon University's Tepper School of Business, and he's been with NYU ever since then. He is a award-winning author of the book TAP, Unlocking the Mobile Economy, which is a double winner of the 2018 Axiom Business Book Award. And this book has been translated into 5 different languages already. In 2004, it's going to take me the better part of the hour to introduce everything that Anindya has done, but let me just quickly go through the gist of this. In 2014, he was named by Poets and Quants as one of the top 40 professors under 40. It's a great honor and achievement. And also by Analytics Week as the top 200 thought leaders in big data and business analytics. Thinkers 50 also named him as top 30 management thinkers globally, and most likely to shape the future of how organizations are managed and led in the next generation. More academically, from the Institute for Operations Research and Management Sciences, the Information Systems Society in the Institute for Operations Research and Management Science, he was named the Distinguished Fellow, the youngest Distinguished Fellow to be named. And this honor is bestowed upon individuals who have made outstanding intellectual contributions to the discipline with publications that have made a significant impact on both theory, research, and practice, and those who have served intellectual stewardship of the field as reflected in mentoring of PhD students and young researchers. And he has done that tremendously well. Also from Informs and the ISS, the Information Systems Society, in 2000, so last year, he was awarded the Practice Impact Award, which was a new award, the inaugural award for the ISS Practice Impact Award. And this is for, this honors business school academics who have demonstrated outstanding leadership and sustained impact on the industry by deeply influencing practitioners, managers, executive, and policymakers using their academic research. So this is a great honor, especially for like ivory tower academics such as myself. We want to make an impact, but we try to make an impact through academic research, but he's been able to translate that and make that go into the boardrooms and policy as well. He has consulted for many companies. I'll just name a few: Alibaba, Apple, Facebook, Google, Microsoft, Samsung, Snapchat, Yahoo, Verizon. He also advises numerous startups all over the world, including in the US, India, Hong Kong, the Netherlands, South Korea, even Singapore, and also China. I think one of his most interesting kind of backgrounds is that he has served as expert witness for many IT and consumer-related litigation. Some very high-profile cases, such as the Facebook IPO in 2012, the Snapchat patent violation against VaporStream, the counterfeit goods case against Amazon.com, the interactive music streaming royalty case between Apple, Amazon, Google, and Spotify, and the Copyrights Royalty Board. But I think the most interesting thing about Anindya is that he is an avid altitude mountaineer. He likes to climb mountains. He has climbed many mountains in multiple continents and is always looking for the next summit. The other secret that I know is that Anindya does not sleep. That's why he can achieve so much in so little time. Anyway, so today I'm very pleased to have our esteemed colleague, Professor Anindya Ghose, with us. And he's going to be talking about monetizing smartphone data for improving business and society. So I hope this did justice to your illustrious career and achievements. I've missed out on a lot, but let's get on. Thank you, Anindya. You can take it from here.
Yeah, thank you, Jungpil. Very kind introduction. I appreciate all the kind words. Also, thank you for having me. Thank you to the organizers, Kim Yong as well, for thinking of me. So yeah, what I thought I'll do today is, a very good morning to all of you in Singapore. What I thought I'll do today is give you a sense of, some of the work that my co-authors and I have been doing in this world of monetizing smartphone data to improve business and society. And this was actually the core subject of the book that Jungpil kindly mentioned. It is now available in a few different languages. Hopefully you get a chance to read it. Okay? So, it all started by sort of, us thinking about this question. I was always intrigued about this idea that, what will the next generation of winning companies look like? What are they going to be, excelling at? And one thing that I learned from the past work is that there are a lot of winners who do a really great job in acting on the known needs of their known customers. And, that's important. But I think that the future winners are going to be those companies who identify and fulfill the unknown needs of their known and unknown customers. Okay, so it's not enough just to target your known customers and their known needs, but you want to also target two more unknowns: the unknown needs of your known customers as well as the unknown needs of your unknown customers. And that's, to be able to get to that, you need to have these three things in place. Okay, they're basically three ingredients to winning, as we call it. First of all, you need to have a presence in the mobile economy. That mobile is now the single biggest and most important source about consumer behavior, and that's simply because as consumers we are always glued to our phones. Okay. And every single action on phone is an important data source that tells the ecosystem something about us, something about our behavior. Okay. The second is we need to have organization invest in analytics. There's just no two ways around it. Analytics gives you the set of toolkit that will help you do all the computational social science you want, whether it's more theoretical or more applied. You need that presence. And then finally, what is really interesting is, we also have to be pragmatic that we live in a world where data quality can often be questioned. And, there's all kinds of, information that can be faked or fraud. There's fraud, fake news and fake ads and fake content. So we need a mechanism to be able to sort of, tease out the bona fide content from like fraudulent content. And that's where blockchain is coming in. Okay. So my recent work has essentially relied on this framework, using mobile as a source of data, analytics as a toolkit, and then increasingly, especially in the world of advertising, we've started to look at using blockchain. Okay. With respect to the second core component of analytics, so Jungpil mentioned my hobby is mountaineering. At one point in time, I thought that was my calling in life, and so. I spend a lot of time in the mountains, not always getting to the summit, but sometimes the journey is the destination, right? So I think of analytics as, this 4-step process where this work that we've been looking at, we can divide these questions into 4 buckets. Okay, so sometimes the question of interest is just descriptive. Okay, you're just exploring the data. Sometimes it's predictive. You're trying to forecast what will happen next. Increasingly, what is interesting is causal analysis, causal inference, where you're trying to explain what the phenomenon is and why consumers are behaving in a certain way. And then finally, you have some prescriptive, using optimization and so on. Your final goal is always business value, right? And so to that previous framework, analytics is the means to the end to extract business value, okay? So today's talk is going to rely on almost 2 decades of research and consulting that I've done, in different parts of the world. I've been very fortunate that companies have given me a chance to learn on their premises, and I'm going to essentially summarize some of the best practices that I have learned across these 5 continents, working with almost 40 companies across a dozen industries. Okay? In terms of toolkits, I like to use different toolkits for different problems. Sometimes it's econometrics, sometimes it's machine learning and deep learning, sometimes it's field experiments. So, as I go along, I'm going to try and give you a flavor for the methods as well, but not necessarily going as deep into, into the methods. Okay, so the first point I want to make is that the mobile economy is huge. Okay, it's several $1 trillion. It's $3 trillion. Yet it is only about 5% of the world's GDP. What that means is it's only going to get bigger from here. Okay, so at the moment, mobile is influencing about 5% of the world's GDP, but it's only going to increase. And in my book, what I've done is I've identified 9 forces that are shaping this economy. Okay? Each of these forces has a distinct impact on consumer behavior on its own. But at the same time, some of these forces can be combined, and the merged force has an even larger impact on consumers. And that's sort of, this is a theme that runs throughout my book, and this is what I'm going to talk about today as well. So, for instance, location-based marketing obviously is, it's not a new concept. It's been around for a while. But obviously, companies have gotten more sophisticated in figuring out that in addition to location, there are many other forces that can be combined to give you some more information about the consumer's intent. So like when you combine location and time, you get context, and context is very important because we all have different avatars. On Sunday, I'm a father taking my daughter to a taekwondo class. On a Monday, I'm an academic going to a business meeting in the same location. Okay, because the context is different. A brand that wants to reach out to me on Sunday has to think about a different set of offers than a brand that wants to connect with me on Monday. Okay, and so as we started to run these experiments in working with different companies, we got to understand that there's a lot more in this world than just location. Fortunately, many other academics in the IS and the marketing field also started looking at this phenomena, and collectively the body of knowledge is vast enough that gave me enough ammunition to to write that book. Okay. So let me start by giving you a sense for this idea of sort of the first thing that we looked at. This is an example of contextual targeting from the city of Seoul in South Korea. Okay, so here's an example. So you've got a telecom provider, let's say South Korea Telecom, looking at the consumer sort of traveling or trajectory data. Okay, and they're trying to ascertain this effectiveness of the different kind of offers that they're going to send. So how should they go about targeting you based on real-time data? Like, what is a good context? Okay, so let me play. Maybe what I'll do is I'll play, at least try to play this snippet, see if this works. And this is an example from Mexico City, but the idea is very similar. Okay, so take a look at this video and see what's going on.
The traffic jam Whopper. We used real-time data to detect our potential buyers in a traffic jam to offer them a Whopper and deliver on the move.
Fernanda, buenos días. Señor Eduardo, buenas tardes.
¡Ay, qué bello!
Llegaste en chinga, cabrón. Me cagaba de hambre.
Our media was 100% dynamic, promoting our service only in high congestion zones. By leveraging traffic and drivers' real-time data, we adjusted our billboards' location and content. The messages displayed information about the remaining time in traffic to order and personalized updates about deliveries in progress. Also, Waze banner ads and push notifications invited drivers to get a Whopper as soon as they entered our delivery zones. People were able to use voice commands to place the order and avoid tickets. Finally, using the latest Google Maps APIs, our app pinpointed vehicle location and speed in order to deliver for the first time ever to a driver on the move. The delivery zones changed, following the traffic live, making our service available when a gridlock was identified, always within a 3-kilometer radius from the restaurants.
Hola Mariana, ¿cómo estás?
¡Ay, te agarraría besos!
Lo siento, estoy en servicio.
In just 1 week, we increased delivery orders by 63%, and our daily app download rate increased 44 times, becoming the #1 fast food app, surpassing McDonald's, Domino's, and Starbucks in Mexico. Coming soon, Los Angeles, San Paulo, and Shanghai. The Traffic Jam Whopper.
Enjoy the traffic jam.
Okay, so hopefully that gives you some context of what happened in Mexico City with Burger King, right? So again, to recap, the idea is people are stuck in traffic. Every part of the world is some traffic jam. Okay, sometimes the traffic jam can be long, 2 hours long, and people can be hungry. So instead of like wasting that opportunity, Burger King realized, what if we use a combination of GPS data from your smartphone, electronic billboards, and traffic congestion data from apps like Waze and Google Maps to reach out to those consumers who place orders on their apps and delight them and surprise them, right? So this is obviously, it's a sort of brilliant idea. And, this is the kind of thing that we've been working on with different companies. So an example is in this case, John Doe leaves home, he goes from home to office and he comes back home. This is his usual trajectory, Monday to Thursday. But then on another day, on Friday or Saturday, John Doe leaves home, but instead of coming back home, you see, he makes 3 other stops. It could be a business meeting, it could be a personal trip, who knows, a shopping trip, it could be any number of reasons, but he doesn't come back home directly. So working with the telecom providers in South Korea, we were investigating when is a good time for people to get these offers, and how many offers should they be receiving, what kind of offers are better received. There's a number of interesting questions here, right? And so this is, I have a couple of papers related. One was published in ISR, it's co-authored with Dongwon Lee and Eric Kwon and Wonseko. And another set of papers co-authored with Jungpil Han, and these are all various team academics. And we were able to, what is a really interesting thing is we were able to run these experiments, convincing these companies to run these experiments for us. And because experiments are the cleanest way to arrive at causal inference, we feel pretty good and pretty confident about what we found. Okay, so we did see that contextual targeting based on deviations from normal trajectory make for great predictive power, and we can definitely target people accordingly. Another example was this notion of billboards, right? So a lot of people, they will claim that billboards don't work, like people don't pay attention to billboard ads. And so, that was the premise for our next hypothesis, that what if, we could figure out a way to monetize billboards, but using smartphone data. Okay, so how would this work? So imagine the city of Tokyo, right? So if you've been to Tokyo, you're probably familiar with this place called Shibuya Crossing, right? Shibuya Crossing, it's a bit like Times Square in New York City, lots of big electronic billboards, lots of people pass through it every day. And so the idea is that, if Nike, the shoe company, wants to run a geo-targeted campaign, what it will do is, or what it could explore is combining billboard advertising with mobile targeting. Okay, so how would that work? Well, so Nike would launch an electronic billboard ad in one of those, very sort of jazzy billboards, electronic billboards. The billboard will play for like 3 minutes. The Nike ad will come up, and let's say the person endorsing the product comes up. And at the same time, a randomized sample of several thousand people who are actually in Shibuya, they will get a geo-targeted offer from Nike. And, like 50% discount or 10% discount. So the idea is a randomized sample of people get to see the billboard ad, and we can monitor, that by looking at the phone data, because, if they just go past the billboard, then the location data changes. If they're stationary, that gets captured in the location data. So, we can ascertain with high accuracy whether they are seeing the billboard ad, and then we are sending them a targeted mobile offer. And then we're going to examine what is the, the interaction effects. So as it turns out, we saw that billboard ad, when combined with mobile targeting, can lead to a 4 times increase in redemptions. Okay, that's a really sort of a compelling value proposition. Because on its own, geo-targeting is great, and but it's roughly 2 to 3% effectiveness in terms of redemptions and sale. But when you combine that with billboards, turns out that conversion rate can increase from, the 2-3%, you can go up to almost 10%. So that's a big jump in efficacy rates. So the point being, in contrary to what many sort of pundits claim that billboard ads don't work, it turns out, well, if you do it right, it can actually work, okay? And it works quite well. So, this experiments then led us to Europe. So, again, just to give you a flavor, having done some work in South Korea, China, and then some of the other parts of Asia, Japan, etc., we next moved on to Europe. So we got a call from, consortium of companies based out of Germany, particularly the telecom providers, and working in tandem with a couple of my German co-authors who are also academics in Germany, Martin Spann, who's at LMU Munich, and our joint postdoc student, Dominic Moderator, who's now an assistant professor in Fordham. We were able to carry on this really interesting set of, geo-targeting experiments in Germany, okay? And this is big. I mean, we worked with 3,500 companies in Europe, okay? And it was large. We worked across 374 cities and towns. So, it's not just, as you can imagine, the scale of these experiments was really, really exhaustive, so to speak. And obviously, when you're interested in computational social science, you care about, the sort of not just the depth, but also the breadth of your data. And that helped us, amass a tremendous amount of data to be able to really answer questions about, for instance, can discount, okay, be used as a tool to reduce the geographic distance between a user and a store? Okay, so how does that work? Okay, so let me give you an example. Imagine there's a large department store in whichever city you are in. Okay, so if you're in Singapore, I'm sure you have your favorite big department store. Okay, now you may be living, a couple of miles away from the department store, but you may have a friend who's just, a couple of 100 meters from the store. Now, on an average, every department store gives the same offer to every customer who is in the, in the area, okay? But we said, how about we customize the discount as a function of distance? Meaning what? Meaning that those customers who are near the store, they need a smaller incentive to come to the department store, okay? So if I'm only a couple of 100 meters from the store, okay, I may not need a very big incentive to come in because I'm so close. But if my friend who's 2 miles away, 3 kilometers away from the store, well, he probably needs a bigger incentive. So why not give him a higher discount? Because that's a good incentive. Whereas, for me, you can reduce the discount or keep it the same, right? And so this is the kind of, again, large-scale randomized experiments we ran where we were basically customizing distance and discount. And that helped us answer this really interesting question about, can price discount be used as an instrument to reduce the frictions of geographic distances, right? And, that nobody had answered that question before. And so we were able to run these experiments and glean a lot of interesting insights from that. Turns out that, yeah, actually people do respond very well to these sort of customized discounts because, it's very intuitive. Look, if you are, a few kilometers away, you need a bigger discount. If you're right there, a couple of 100 meters away, you don't need as big a discount, right? So I think people understand the economics of these effects pretty well, and that helps us monetize this information, okay? All right, so having, done some successful experimental work in Europe, now sort of we headed back to Asia again. So this time, we started looking at collaborating with companies in China. In particular, we were looking at monetizing this notion of crowdedness, right? So you may be thinking, what do you mean, right? And so the idea is, think about public transportation. In most major cities of the world, New York, Shanghai, Sao Paulo, Singapore, Mumbai, etc., if you have a subway train or an overhead train, during commuting hours, it's very likely to be crowded, right? People are going to office or wherever. Now, what happens when people are in a crowded situations? Well, most of us, we take our phones out and our phone becomes our immersion spot. So we started thinking about, how about this idea? Should advertisers send mobile offers when the consumer context is more crowded or when it's less crowded? Okay. So if you just think about this intuitively for a minute, imagine how you would behave. Are you more likely to respond to mobile advertising or mobile marketing offers when you are in a more crowded context, like in a packed subway train, or in a less crowded context? Okay. And so this became the hypothesis in our follow-up paper. That paper was published in Marketing Science. It's co-authored with Michelle Andrews, who's a professor at Emory University, and Ximing Luo, who's a professor at Temple, right? And so we really started digging deep in this question, and how does the contextual crowdedness influence your behavior? And again, nobody had looked at this question, and it seemed like an important question, right? Because there are several different contexts where people can be, in such crowded situations. And so the question becomes, is that a good window for a brand to have this conversation with you? Okay. Now, in this case, while ideally you would like to have a randomized experiment, we instead relied on what we call a natural experiment. Okay, so as opposed to a field experiment, a natural experiment is, think of this as a situation when there's some sort of an exogenous shock to the system, but not something that is designed by the academic, but rather it's almost happening organically. It's sort of that's why it's called a natural shock. Okay, so what we relied upon is this idea that so when you're trying to examine this question, right, you want some sort of a causal inference, right? So what we found was that as the density of crowdedness increases, okay, look at the x-axis, you can have one person in the compartment of your subway train, or 2 or 3 or 4 per square meter. As the crowdedness increases, passengers per square meter, look at the y-axis. The purchase rates kept increasing, okay, from 2.7 to 2.95 to 3.2 and finally 4%. So there was a substantial increase in the purchase rates as people got into more and more crowded situations. And so, obviously that, at least, from a intuitive perspective, it was pretty surprising that we actually expected. Initially going in, we thought it would be the other way around. Like, people get turned off by, crowds, and they're not going to be paying attention to what's happening in this world of advertising. But turns out we carried on a survey. So this was joint work with, telecom providers in China, like China Mobile, and advertisers, local transportation authorities, all of multiple sort of data sets had to be stitched together. But then we carried out a survey. We asked these people that, what's going on? How come you are responding favorably to marketing offers when you are in more crowded situations? And that's when, these people opened up in the survey responses, and they said, look, when we are surrounded by these crowded crowds, sometimes, it can be pretty adverse. There's a lot of crowdedness. It can create hostility and all that. So we like to find an escape, and our smartphone actually becomes an escape for us. So in highly crowded situations, like in commuting context or transit passengers, subway, train, buses, airports, etc., we take our phone out, and our phone becomes our immersion space, and this is our private space, so nobody bothers us. And that's when, during the time, if we can get a relevant marketing offer, okay, and the keyword here is relevance. If we can get a relevant marketing offer, then we are likely to respond favorably to that brand messaging. And that's what we started seeing, okay? So and you know, this is we saw the same set of findings over and over again, and like I said, to be able to nail down the causal aspect of all of this, we relied on a natural experiment, which went as follows. Okay, in an ideal world, you want, you know, there are certain passengers who commute in subway trains all the time. To get to causal inference, you need a system where a different set of people would actually be then commuting in the trains. So what happened is, on one of these days, a very important politician in China, you know, he was being escorted from one part of the city to the other part of the city. Now, when VIPs are being escorted, right, police often, out of safety concern, they close off, they cordon off parts of the city so that no traffic can get in, get out. And that's what we harnessed. We leveraged that opportunity when the cops closed off the cities, that forced those people who normally take a car or an Uber or a bus, they were forced to take the subway. So we got a completely new population of people responding to our offers as an exogenous shock to the system. And that's what made this you know, very viable set of results, right? Okay, so the last sort of commercial example I want to talk about is, you know, very fascinating idea of trajectory-based targeting in a shopping mall context. Okay, so what do I mean by that? So what I mean is, okay, you see the Apple Store, right? On the top left, there's a big red dot out there. So Apple, right, if Apple is just using location-based targeting, it might end up concluding that those gentlemen standing in front of the store are interested in Apple. Okay. However, you know, it could just be a false positive that because, you know, these people are not really interested in Apple, they just, you know, standing there, maybe Apple Store is a rendezvous point for them. You know how sometimes my friends say, hey, Anindya, wait for me in front of the Apple Store in Seoul, and then we can go grab a coffee. So it's like a landmark. It's like, I have no real interest in getting inside the Apple Store. I'm just standing there as a landmark. So if Apple just using location-based data, then it might reach this erroneous conclusion that these people are prime candidates for location-based targeting. But what if Apple knew that before they came to the Apple Store, they first went to the Samsung store on the second floor, then they went to the Huawei store on the first floor, then they went to the Xiaomi store. Okay, then they went to the Google Pixel store, then they came to Apple. Now that is called trajectory-based targeting. And as you can imagine, this is a far more richer trail of data about the consumer's intent. Okay? Because now this consumer has very explicitly expressed their intent that by going to 5 competing smartphone stores, they are very clearly conveyed that they are interested in a smartphone. Okay, so Xiaomi, Huawei, Google Pixel, Apple, right? These are all competitors, and this is the kind of trajectory-based targeting that we then implemented in several, you know, different places, including, you know, in some of the largest department stores and shopping malls in Asia. Okay. And so the idea was, again, you know, we're going to design these randomized field experiments and try to ascertain in a purely causal way the incremental effect that trajectory-based targeting can have on shopping behavior. Okay, so this paper then got published in Management Science. This was joint work with Beibei Li, who's a professor in Carnegie Mellon, and with Siwan Liu, who's a professor in Penn State. Okay? And again, we were quite fortunate to be able to run these large-scale experiments in shopping malls. I did some additional work in airports in the Middle East. And one such example is, you know, think about this big shopping mall, you know, more than 1 million square feet, 300 stores. And so we leveraged the Wi-Fi-based system to be able to send these trajectory-based targeting offers to consumers. Okay, and we found, unequivocally, we found that trajectory-based targeting has significantly more incremental impact on consumer behavior than any other form of targeting. Okay? We have looked at randomized targeting, we have looked at location-based targeting, and of course trajectory-based targeting, and quite clearly the highest redemption rates in the highest spending in store. All of this was demonstratively more higher, greater with trajectory when it comes to comparing location and random. Okay, so we also had obviously we needed a control group, so we had the well-designed experiments to be able to piece out this causal inference. Okay, so so those are the examples of marketing and advertising and how we are improving businesses. So the next topic is how are we using smartphone data to improve society? And obviously, healthcare is one of the fundamental pillars of social welfare. So if you can, engineer improvements in healthcare, you will basically reap social welfare enhancing benefits. At least that theoretical possibility exists. That is the direction of research now that I've taken in more recent years. So this is a project a very interesting project where we focused on chronic disease patients. In particular, think about diabetes patients or arthritis or cholesterol or blood pressure, right? Like different people have different kinds of chronic diseases. And what we were really interested in was to figure out if the adoption of mobile health products, smartphone and wearable devices, does the adoption of these products lead to an improvement in people's healthcare? Now the question is, how do you demonstrate that, right? So it sort of had this flavor where you need both a short-term and a long-term effect, right? So if you're trying to understand the impact and the sustainability of wearable health and wearable devices and mobile health on chronic disease patients, then ideally you need to measure and monitor both short-term and long-term effects. So that's how we went around it. Okay, we were looking at how people were making changes in their lifestyle, such as exercising and sleeping and eating habits. And as a consequence of making changes in the lifestyle, we were then able to examine some short-term effects, such as a reduction in diabetes, a reduction in blood glucose, and long-term effects like hospital visits and medical expenses. So, we needed to examine both short-term and long-term effects. Okay, but hopefully, you get the context, right? So, okay, how do we go about doing it? So this is an example of a screenshot of this mobile app. So we're looking at, randomizing, again, a large-scale randomized experiment where, one group of people will get access to these wearable device apps, like a mobile version or a desktop version, but another group of people will not have access to these benefits from these apps. Okay, and here you can see, for example, this is the interface of the app. The user is inputting their exercise behavioral data, their eating habits, drinking habits, smoking habits, sleeping habits, all kinds of things, right? And then every day, these users who've been randomly selected, they are going to come to this online portal and they're going to upload all of this information. Okay. All right, so how do we go about doing it? So here we worked with a major health platform in Asia. This paper got published in MIS Quarterly. This is a joint work with Beibei Li, who's at CNU, and Shitong Gua, who's at Harbin, and Yuan Dang, who's also at Harbin. Okay, so this paper took a long, it took a long time because it was the first of its kind, and again, we wanted to make sure we were answering a practical question and not just an academic question. And so we wanted to get it right. And that means we have to work once again, we have to work with a consortium of companies. Okay, so here, this platform was working with a network of physicians and nurses. Okay, and we had about 20 internal physicians and nurses and about 9,900, almost 10,000 external physicians. Okay, platform had about 150,000 users, which is great, so that we have a large sample. Now comes the design of the randomized experiment. So how do we go about doing it? So again, remember, the question is, does the adoption of the mobile health app cause a change in people's lifestyle, which then causes a change in their healthcare? Okay. So here we need two control groups. One control group has no treatment. Another one gets the desktop, the web version of the app. But the treatment groups are, we have the mobile health app treatment group, and then we have the non-personalized reminder and a personalized reminder. Okay. So we have two additional treatment groups, one that gets a personalized reminder about their exercise, and another one that gets a non-personalized reminder. So here on the left, you'll see this is an example of a non-personalized reminder. Why? Well, look at what it's saying. It's saying, it's a generic advice. Regular exercise at moderate intensity is very important for blood glucose. It's a very generic one. But look at the right one. Right side says, addresses me by name. Dear Mr. Ghose, you haven't not been active so lately. You can take a walk, you get regular exercise, etc., etc. So that's what we mean by personalized and non-personalized. And we were hoping, to see, just like in marketing, personalization is beneficial, positive. We were wondering if personalization in healthcare also has similar benefits, right? And what we found took us by surprise. Okay. So here, for example, you see that the difference in the blood glucose levels, first column, difference in hemoglobin levels, second column, difference in hospital visits, and difference in medical expenses. So you'll see that, first of all the treatment groups show a statistically significant effect in terms of reduction in blood glucose and blood hemoglobin, and a reduction in hospital visits and medical expenses. So clearly, those consumers or those patients who adopt the mobile health app are definitely changing their lifestyle and behavior that is causing a short-term healthcare benefit and long-term healthcare benefit, right? You definitely see that. But then in addition to that, notice that T3, the personalized reminder, actually is sort of backfiring. The personalized reminder is not working out well. The non-personalized reminders leads to better, individual behavior in terms of the changes in the lifestyle. So what we then, when we surveyed these patients, they said, look, the personalized reminder kind of feels intrusive, and we get worried or concerned about being judged, and we don't like that. So that's why we decided not to act upon it. So overall, in the paper, we do show that mobile health has a significant effect on the healthcare of patients. There is a reduction in glucose levels, which, by the way, all of this is being driven by a 17% reduction in food calories, a 5% reduction in exercise, and a 14% reduction increase in daily sleeping time. So you're sleeping more, you're exercising more, and you're eating less. These are the reasons why, your lifestyle is getting better, and that is causing a better healthcare outlook. In the long term, we also found that by having these lifestyle changes and short-term benefits, they do translate into long-term benefits, like a reduction in hospital visits and medical expenses. We also show that mobile has a stronger effect than the desktop version, which is, makes a lot of sense. And finally, and surprisingly, the non-personalized version does have a higher impact than personalized. Okay, so I think, from a healthcare perspective, personalization is a double-edged sword. I have a Harvard Business Review article based on this study as well. So feel free to reach out to me if you're interested. It's also there on my LinkedIn page. All right, so this is the end of, sort of mostly the end of my talk, and I want to sort of remind us of what I thought I would convey as the takeaways. Okay, so first of all, there are 9 forces that, collectively my academic work and my consulting work has identified that can be used to monetize the economy. And, what is important in this conversation is, what do we know about privacy? What do we know about consumer reaction to all of this in terms of their comfort feeling? What we know is consumers appreciate companies that act like a butler, not like a stalker. Okay? There is a thin line, right, dividing a butler and a stalker. And as it turns out, it's actually not that difficult to be a butler. It's actually pretty straightforward. It's sometimes some organizations, they give into temptation, they become stalkers, but that's not going to help us much. I think, there are some broader applications of mobile data beyond marketing. I touched upon chronic diseases. We're also starting to do some work with COVID and public health. I have at least 2 projects on using smartphone data for helping us better understand how to deal with the pandemic, the COVID pandemic. And then there's a separate stream of work that we're just beginning to look at education, how the smartphone helps with education. All right, so that's about it for this evening, or this morning rather, in Singapore. Those are my, Twitter and LinkedIn credentials and handles. Please feel to reach out. You can also drop me an email at my NYU address. Okay, so that's it for now.
Thank you, Anindya. A big round of virtual applause, if you will, for Anindya for a great talk. We still have a bit of time for Q&A. If you have questions, please feel free to type them in the Q&A box. There's a couple kind of clarification and some questions, but I just wanted to kind of tie your talk a little bit and get your kind of input tie your talk to some of the other keynotes that we had. So we had Sandy Pentland from MIT, we had Noshir Contractor from Northwestern, and they gave very interesting talks as well. One of the big kind of differences, I guess, that I see from their work and your work is your quest to be a very much more pragmatic in terms of, okay, we need to do more action oriented. It's not just understanding, like for Noshir Contractor's case, he was understanding team behaviors and team effectiveness, understanding human behavior through this computational lens and, using computational data, trace data from, let's say, enterprise social media platforms. But in your case, it's actively going after and trying to make an impact. Impacting healthcare, impacting like business effectiveness, and so on. And so there was a discussion, kind of a call from Noshir in yesterday's keynote, saying the era of big data is over. Not big, it's not over, but big data is not important. Broad data is important. Right? It's the ability, and I see this in your work, kind of implicitly, where it's really the ability to, in order to make very good inferences and make these causal and, kind of not just predictive, but causal and prescriptive inferences using these, computational trace data, you need to go after the right data. The problem these days, and what you've been able to do so fantastically, is that you've been able to orchestrate companies, because no one entity has access to all the data that's required to make these inferences. And that's the biggest challenge, right? We want broad data. Everybody has big data, but different aspects of big data. The data is out there, but not under the purview or the control of a particular entity. As an academic, as an esteemed academic such as yourself, you had the clout and the kind of the power to bring together these people to the table and actually design these data pipelines, connect the data so that you know exactly where the person was. Like you would have kind of geolocation data, longitude, latitude, and whatnot, from in the shopping malls, but to connect that with, this is a Xiaomi store, this is an Apple store, this is a Huawei store, that requires the integration with a lot more data from other kind of entities and institutions, right? And so that's kind of the big challenges. And I think, how do you see, for the good, again, we're trying, there's a fine line between a butler and a stalker. And it's not evident how consumers or just regular citizens kind of perceive this, when you become a butler versus a stalker. There's no kind of certification. So I'm not a stalker, I'm a butler certification. And so it's very difficult to know, is it a good idea to promote this kind of broad data sharing on a more kind of generalized scale? Not just, I need to do this experiment, so on a one shot, we're going to bring together these, or do we need to somehow focus on, or should we be promoting these kinds of data platforms? And some with privacy aware technologies, privacy preserving technologies, so that all the anonymity of consumers, all that stuff is kind of guaranteed. But is there a way to somehow promote these kinds of data sharing platforms for the greater good of science? Like it's making available this kind of data so that anybody with interesting hypotheses that kind of vow not to be stalkers but butlers of the human society. Yeah, again, I'm just talking about very hypothetical, but I just wanted to get your thoughts, because you've been able to actually kind of be in the midst of that orchestration, and that's the biggest challenge for kind of the fruition of computational social science in actually making an impact into practice. So I just wanted to hear your thoughts on that.
No, it's a really, really good point, Jungpil, so thanks for raising it. I would say, look, it's been a journey, and the journey, it's not a smooth journey. There are a lot of hiccups, impediments. For every success, there's also a failure. And so there's a few things that I've learned in the process. For starters, at least in my younger days, when I was, let's call it hesitant or more reticent to engage with companies, I did not realize that, there's a tremendous amount of, desire on their behalf to engage with us as well, because they do see the value that academics provide. And, it took me some time to realize. I always felt that, I'll have to sell myself or sell my skill set. As it turns out, is actually almost the other way around. A lot of companies, I wouldn't say all of them, but a lot of companies are, delighted and very pleasantly, surprised when you approach them, and, a lot of the times they're willing to go ahead. This is from a more pragmatic approach, I would say, propose a question that is not too ambitious, not something that when you're trying to boil the ocean, because the moment it comes across as very ambitious of boiling the ocean, then too many stakeholders get involved. And then, of course, too many cooks spoil the food, sort of thing, right? So my approach has been, slow, steady, small, slow, and steady, so the 3S. And then as things progress, as they see the results of your efforts, gradually sort of opening up the scope and expanding, the opportunities there. That's how I've dealt with it. But I really sort of emphasize the first point, that companies love to engage with academics because they get tremendous value out of it, right? Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And so, that's how sort of, things move on. Obviously, you're always, as an academic, thinking, is there a research publication opportunity? But I generally, increasingly over time, also, I feel more gratified if I can solve a real problem. And so now I have to think about what is the confluence of an academic opportunity and a real world problem, right? Now, to your other question about data, access to data and portability. So look, I'm all for it. And I think theoretically, definitely makes sense. The practical execution of this can be tricky, right? Part of the reason is, how in many of our journals, we are now required to release the data set after publication, and I think it's a great practice. But at the same time, there are also exceptions to that, like Management Science, for instance, which is an informed journal, provides us many exceptions to not having to release the data, because then the company with whom you've signed an NDA, like they get into trouble, right? So that becomes a practical impediment. So I do think there is value, to having this sort of data repository. I think practical execution of that will be an issue, because there's also this. We also live in this world where there's always a risk of security hacking and breaches, and so a company might get very worried if you tell them, hey, eventually after this publication, I'm going to release this data set in a public repository so my other fellow academics can access it. That's going to make them very nervous. So then we have to sort of figure out how to, because if you make them nervous, then that's the end of the collaboration, right? They're not gonna. They'll find somebody else. So I think that balancing act is very important.
Yeah.
And I think that I see a question. I see a bunch of questions. In
yeah,
chat.
I'll try to moderate. I'll pick the questions for you. So, so I think we've already answered this. How do you persuade companies to work with? So we'll ignore that. I know that you've done some studies using weather. So there's a question about any case studies to highlight. If you can quickly kind of highlight the gist of that study, I think that would be helpful.
Yeah. So actually, both social dynamics and weather are two distinct chapters in my book. So, I'm not trying to sell my book, but I think it's probably best, sort of summarized in the book. The basic idea is, changes in real-time weather, that information comes to the smartphone because of your location data. So you can basically connect the dots between the raw location data and then infer how the weather is changing. Okay, and then based on that, you can, personalize the offerings. If it's hot and humid, you send them an offer for a salad. If it's cold, you send them an offer for coffee or something like something hot and warm, right? So yeah, there's a bunch of academic papers also that relies on weather-based targeting, and it's chapter 7 in my book talks about that. Chapter 8 talks about social dynamics. So my behavior in the shopping context is a function of my friends and family's behavior. That's what we mean by social dynamics, right? Mm-hmm. So when you're in a department store, you're not just alone. So that's what social dynamics is.
Okay, so so Wilson, I think you might have to get the book and read these chapters from the book. Okay, there's a couple questions that from Cliff and Rupali. I guess they kind of deal more with because they're excited about this kind of stuff. So I think you've paved the way so that they can also imitate or mimic your methodology to be able to do this. So Rupali was asking, are there any instances of studies using smartphones to make an impact to reduce inequality, poverty reduction, etc.? Can you throw light on how technology can be used in the area of education? I know you've started working in education in your last slides, and post-COVID situation, especially in South Asia. I think these are great questions that need, immediate, very kind of contemporaneous questions that we need to focus on. And you've provided excellent kind of case studies about how you might, one might want to think about conducting these. We can't rely on Anindya to do all these studies because he has the skill sets. But I think through your book, through your work, we've been inspired to, now we know how it's done, how the success cases were. If you can give a few words on these topics, if you've done any work recently that you haven't talked about, that would be, I think, helpful as well. Give some more ideas.
Yeah, no, I think so. I agree. Jungpil, Rupali's question is terrific. Look, I personally haven't done work on using smartphone data to reduce inequality or poverty, but I can see where the dots are and you can connect the dots. So, the most important way that a phone can reduce inequality is by equalizing access to information. Okay. And so this is true. We've seen this in sub-Saharan Africa where, $50 smartphones were penetrated in extraordinary proportion. So the average person can buy, $50 phone as opposed to $1,000 iPhone, right? And so we're already starting to see in sub-Saharan Africa and some other parts of the world as well that, smartphone penetration, equalizing access to information does have a positive effect on reducing inequality, okay? Whether that translates into poverty reduction, I have not seen any studies. I think that's a very long-term study. You need like a decade of data to be able to track participants over time. But I think it's important. So I think, it's more power to people who can design something like this.
No, I think, and we've seen this many times with a lot of studies looking at healthcare behaviors. Behavioral change, I think we can get like notifications, personalization, all these things. And again, your work actually looked at long-term change. A lot of studies were kind of disappointing because they can do immediate short-term change, but they didn't result in persistent, sustained long-term change. And in your work, you're actually seeing reduction in healthcare costs, hospital visits, and all these. And so this poverty reduction is kind of the same idea, where we do have it's behavior change that leads to kind of immediate poverty reduction, but whether it reduces overall inequality, you have to kind of track through the long-term chain of events that would lead to a sustained behavioral changes. And I think you can take inspiration from your work in the mHealth area as well. I think we've already run out of time. The scheduled time was from 9:30 to 10:30.
Yeah.
I want to just thank Anindya again for a great, inspiring talk. I think it energized a lot of us in terms of, wow, we can also do this as well. And it's not just there's a lot of data out there, but a lot of times, especially in my case, I do that as well. There's a lot of data out there, and we try to make sense of it, but there's always something that's not right. So, I wish I had this kind of data, or, but so that we can't make that critical inference that's needed. Whereas, you gave us kind of the courage to go out and actually try to design the best approach to actually make those causal inferences. I think there's great inspiration from that. So I want to thank Anindya once again, and thank all the attendees and the people joining us today for an excellent morning. The conference continues for another day today. I hope you enjoy the rest of the forum, and so we'll end it at that. Thank you very much, Anindya.
Thank you, Jungpil. Thanks for moderating. Thank you so much.